Support comes from the Arizona Inn, a four-diamond, family-owned historic resort hotel and restaurant on Elm Street near the U of A. Information is at arizonainn.com.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Ninsel, executive editor of the Tucson Weekly and Tucson Local Media, and we're here to talk Zona politics. Joining me today is Congressman Raul Grijalva, who has represented Arizona's 3rd congressional district since 2002. Congressman Grijalva, welcome to Zona politics.
Thanks a lot, Jim. Appreciate it. Glad to be back.
Let's just start off with immigration, obviously a big issue these days. And you've said you want to abolish ICE. You're in on that movement. Beyond the slogan, what does abolish ICE mean to you?
Yeah, that's been the whole thing. The hashtag became the story. I think those of us, and I didn't sign on to the legislation that was put together because it was more slogan than content. There was no prescriptive. What we are saying, and the majority of Democrats that support are saying, we have to, after all these years, after the fact that this department and this law enforcement agency has grown 20 times its size from 2000, and the fact that there's no audits, there's no check and balance, and that maybe it's time to look at what the mission is, what the resources that are being used, how the money's being spent, and go back to a situation where Border Patrol was part of Justice Department, where alcohol, tobacco, and firearms had its proper place, and begin to look, and where Customs was under Commerce and Treasury, and begin to look at what that mission is, as opposed to what we're doing now, which is, unfortunately, it's become, its reputation is tainted because it's become, to some extent, the arm that's used to back up the rhetoric of Trump and Miller in the White House and Nielsen as Secretary of Homeland Security, a rhetoric that is more politicized than it is about trying to solve an issue. We saw this in this family separation, zero tolerance, no preparation. The consequences are still before us. Kids and their parents, primarily women, their moms, not being able to get together. 419 still, no connection at all. Some are destined never to be reconnected, and that's been said already. The private detention centers and the Southwest Keys being one of them here in Tucson and in Mesa and in Phoenix, issues of abuse, sexual and physical, issues of lack of monitoring, all those things coming up. So you have an agency that has grown so big, and yet the checks and balances and controls that you would want out of any federal agency are not there. So it's about restructuring, redefining, and reforming ICE.
Not just letting all these people go and laying them off and letting them join the private.
Enforcement is going to be part of our reality. You know, the issue was never, open the borders and tell everybody to go and take all law enforcement away and let the drug runners, I mean, that's been the hysteria around a reaction to that. The issue has been that enforcement is always going to be part of it. Any immigration reform in the future, and hopefully we'll get there, is going to have to involve a leg in that reform that is going to be security.
And you actually had a chance to meet with the Director of Homeland Security, Kirstjen Nielsen, and what did you came away from that meeting pretty critical of her? Yeah,
I think that there was a lack of capacity. I think the Secretary is completely in over her head. There seemed to be almost a lack of understanding of what the policies in place, the overreaction to Trump's rhetoric and what it's doing to communities and what it's doing to the reputation and the well-being of our nation, period. And this, the issue was around family separation, but it was also the points I just brought about. Where is the accountability around ICE and the policies that ICE is implementing? No real answers, no real understanding about the depth of what is going on around us, and like I said, I think many of us asked that it's time for her to resign, be put aside, bring in a professional person that can begin to run the agency the way it's supposed to be run, as it is now. And you know, this latest things with the abuse cases that are coming up at these centers is even given more impetus for her removal. Beyond that, now you have 500 dads and their kids in a detention center in Texas that are going on a hunger strike based on the fact that they've been there for long periods of time, and that the whole traumatizing experience of being locked up for up to 13 months, we've had cases of 3 years, and nothing's been adjudicated. Some of the dads are even saying, just deport us and get us over with so I can be with my kids and my family.
And these were people who came in seeking asylum.
Exactly.
And, you recently toured that Southwest Key facility here in Tucson. What impressions did you come away from?
Somebody asked me that, and I said, it's not hell. It's not one of Dante's rings for the kids that are there. But it's not Shangri-La either. It's a detention center. It's a shelter. And as such, they're separated from their parents. And so there is a level of cruelty associated with it, regardless of how nice the picture is painted, because you have a situation where you have little kids, 3, 4, 5, 6, who have had no contact with their parents for months. That pulling apart of kids and their families, and particularly their moms, to me has been, I didn't think we could go any lower in terms of the rhetoric and the practices and the policies under this administration, but we seem to have hit that low point.
And, we saw some efforts in the House to push through some kind of immigration reform, and it seemed like a lot of that was driven by the idea of this discharge petition that would have allowed a bill that would be largely supported by Democrats to get released, and that didn't happen, and then they had these 2 other bills, and they didn't go anywhere. No. So talk a little bit about, were you disappointed that the Republicans, you couldn't peel off enough Republicans to get that discharge petition?
That was a disappointment, and the disappointment also was that we had come up, and all of us gave in to the Herd Aguilar, a bipartisan bill that dealt with dealing with some security issues, and also dealing with the codifying for the long run of DACA, present and future. And that didn't get its airing. That didn't get its opportunity. And that was a bipartisan bill that had 38 Republicans on it and would have passed. The DREAM Act, if it's put on the floor, would still pass. But this has been a very calculated issue around immigration, because I think the Republican Party, particularly the leadership in the House, and certainly the Trump administration, sees immigration as this major wedge issue coming into the general election in November. And I think as we go forward, this is going to become more and more of an issue, and try to use that to keep this division going in this country of us versus them. This is the reason why we have problems marginalizing and demonizing migrants and the border to such an extreme that you might create the same scenario through this fear-mongering and outright bigotry from the words from the president to be able to sneak back and try to keep their majorities in Congress.
And I want to shift gears a little bit. The EPA has announced that they are going to freeze these fuel efficiency standards and tell California they can't set them any higher. You were upset by this.
Yeah, all I would ask sometimes from my conservative colleagues and is that you be consistent. When it comes to states' rights, if it's a social issue, if it's an issue dealing with a woman's reproductive rights, they're all over. The states should make that decision. If it's a decision about how you fund health care and how you take care of the poor, states should be in charge of it. We have an issue in which California and other states are moving into dealing with air quality and dealing with fuel efficiency and emissions. California has some of the most aggressive and good policies, and it's working. And now you're going to override what is appropriately a state decision. Beyond that, it is a dangerous precedent. It is a dangerous precedent because as much as the denial is in this administration that climate change doesn't exist, that the human footprint is not creating the climate change in this world, we're not dealing with it. And by ignoring it, I just think it aggravates the situation. The weather phenomena that we're seeing around all over the country, whether it's the fires, the droughts, the flooding, the seashore reducing and receding, all of that has been tied to climate change. And we pull out of the Paris Agreement, and now EPA is going in a completely different direction in terms of how to mitigate that. And that, to me, is not only It might be good for industry. It might be good for the polluters and for the extractors, but it is horrible for the public health and the general well-being of the planet in the future.
And a scandal-plagued director, the EPA, Scott Pruitt, finally had to tender his resignation. Were you happy to see him go?
Yeah, you're happy, but I don't think the philosophy of EPA is going to change at all. I think the person that's being promoted to take over, it's the same philosophy. It's a different face and maybe not as a grotesque way of dealing with those issues, but that's not going to change. The fundamental issue is that Congress hasn't played any co-equal role, the House of Representatives, with the administration, so there's no accountability. The same as for Zinke. Zinke has 15 active investigations in front of
Interior Department, right?
Interior Department. I see him as the next one to fall. The whole issue with Halliburton and what those land deals were, it's being investigated as well. So I see Zinke as the next domino in what has been possibly and historically one of the most corrupt cabinets and administrations in the modern history of this country. And I think that Zinke's the next one to fall.
And there's a lot of talk about revising the Endangered Species Act right now. And are you concerned about that move? And
that's the biggest assault right now. And the Endangered Species Act is so important because it's a linchpin. It's a linchpin to real environmental analysis before something is done on a federal project or any project that affects that. Endangered Species Act has worked well. It's brought species back, and it's stabilized species. So by reducing it, making it a categorical exclusions, limiting the study time, constricting the study areas, you have essentially on public lands primarily opened up huge swaths for extraction with no study of the consequences.
And we may see that happen in Rosemont, the Rosemont Mine Project.
Yeah, that's I think one of the fortunate things at Rosemont is that the litigation and the studies that were done and brought up the problems that are inherent in there, not only with water but air quality, those are ongoing, and you cannot change the facts that already exist in the ground.
You've reintroduced legislation to prevent the closure of Tucson's Cherry Belle postal facility. Talk about why it's important to keep Cherry Belle open and how the partial closure has affected southern Arizona.
There's the issue of the jobs, number one. But the real issue is this is a growing area, southern Arizona, and that was the main spoke that fed southern Arizona. And now, you're going to have to send it to Phoenix, have it processed there, and then sent back. A whole day plus. And so for people that are dependent on universal delivery of mail, are dependent on those routes, are depending on those timing and the confidentiality of that, I think Cherry Belle continues to be for a growing area. We're a growth area. And my legislation says we're a growth area. Those projections are valid. They've been proven valid over the last decade. And therefore, closing this processing center in Tucson, Arizona is something that you're going to have to reopen in another 5 or 6 years when the growth and the demand from the public for their mail service is such that it can't be met by shuttling it back and forth from Phoenix.
Are you also concerned, a lot of people are voting by mail right now. Are you concerned that ballots are going to end up arriving later and past the election day?
Exactly. There's an issue about democracy involved in this thing as well. And now with all the things that, you can't personally, is the law going to apply or not, whether people can harvest them and present them as a whole. So it's almost, to be safe, you have to mail them. And, any delay in that affects an election. And, 75,000 people in 3 states and a few counties elected Trump president. And so every vote does count.
We're just about out of time, but your office recently received an award for constituent service, best in the nation. Yeah,
very, very proud of the staff. Very proud of the people that, the constituents that come there. That's a side of what we do that doesn't get attention, but it's the grind every day. We don't ask people, are you a Republican? Are you registered to vote? Are you a Democrat? Are you an independent? People come in, veterans, people with immigration issues, Social Security, the list goes on. And we do our best on case by case to try to expedite and help them navigate this government of ours and the agencies. And they earn, out of all the offices in Congress, we got that award, and I'm very, very proud for them, because that's a lot of work that's underappreciated and not recognized. So I'm glad we were able to recognize them.
We're out of time. We didn't even get a chance to talk about skinny healthcare plans or Bears ears or Russian interference. So I'm disappointed, but hopefully
or dynasties being built in southern Arizona. That would be fun to talk about too someday.
Without a doubt. Another time.
Another time.
All right. We will be right back. I thank my guest, first of all, Congressman Raul Grijalva, and then we will be right back with Mary Matiella, one of the candidates in the Congressional 2 race.
Zona Politics is made possible with the generous support of the Loft Cinema, Tucson's independent movie theater. The Loft features independent, foreign, and documentary films, cult classics, discussions with filmmakers, and much more, including the Loft Film Fest in November. The Loft is located at 3233 East Speedway Boulevard. Showtimes can be found at loftcinema.org. Support for Zona Politics is provided by Hotel Congress in historic downtown Tucson. More information at hotelcongress.com and 622-8848. The Tucson Hispanic Chamber of Commerce serves the business community in the bilingual, bicultural region of the Arizona-Sonora border and is a proud media partner with Zona Politics. Learn more at TucsonHispanicChamber.org.
All of these young people from the community come together, actually get up and do something.
We can do anything!
I think we've attracted a lot of people that are super passionate.
We're here at the No Ban, No Wall protest.
If you come out of college, you have this experience, you know how things run, you have a huge leg up.
People who have ideas and who are dreamers, you know what I mean, who really want to get themselves out there. I think that they should come here.
My next guest is Mary Matiella, who is among the Democrats running for Congress in Southern Arizona's District 2. The incumbent, Martha McSally, is now running for the U.S. Senate, so it's an open seat, and this seat promises to be one of the most competitive in the country. Mary, welcome to Zona Politics.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Talk a little bit about yourself. You've had a long career, culminating in a high-ranking position at the Pentagon, but
Right.
a lot of work in the federal government and elsewhere before that. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, it actually started, my work with the federal government actually started here in Tucson. I worked as a summer hire at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. And from there, I ended up partnering with my husband, who was in the military. We went all over the world, Panama, Germany, all over the United States, and always kept a federal position. And it ended up with me getting a presidential appointment. President Obama asked me to be the Assistant Secretary of the Army. I had a $240 billion budget I was responsible for, which trained and equipped 1 million soldiers. So a long career in federal government that started here in Tucson.
And why Congress? Why did you decide that Congress was what your next step would be?
Well, because our institutions are being broken by this administration. Many of our domestic programs are being defunded, or their budget is going down to the point where they're no longer able to do what they must for the people of the United States. So since I know federal government very well, and since I know what the needs of Southern Arizona are for CD2, I felt I was in a position to stand in the way of and I want to fix these federal institutions to make sure that they work for the people of the United States, to have the same opportunities that I had, going from the cotton fields all the way to a presidential appointment. There were a lot of institutions that helped me do that, and I don't want those institutions to be broken by this administration. I'm here to make sure that they get fixed and work for others.
And, you talk a lot about income inequality and your concerns about that in this country. And talk a little bit about some of the steps you think Congress should take to address that.
Well, one of the main reasons there is income inequality is because salaries have not kept up with economic growth in this country. For the last 40 years, salaries have been basically stagnant. If our salaries had kept up with growth via the, let's say, 1979 model of growth, we'd actually be getting $11,000 more a year is on the average. So you can see how even not being able to pay the rent, not being able to pay mortgages because our salaries haven't kept up. One of the starting points, of course, is to increase minimum wages to $15. That's very, very important. And also to pay attention to salaries and the fact that salaries should be connected to growth. And we've got to, right now we have full employment. That's the case, our jobs are there. They just don't pay well enough, and we need to pay attention to salaries.
And you were probably unhappy, I imagine, with the last tax cut passed by Congress.
Very unhappy, because that tax cut, $1.6 trillion, did benefit organizations, companies, and the very rich. And it was at the expense of the taxpayer. The taxpayer was the one that ended up paying for the very rich to get that tax cut. That money is needed for other things. It's needed for education. It's needed for health care. It's needed to invest in everyday people so that way they can benefit from education and get better jobs and live a better life and be more independent, economically independent. Right now, that's hard to do.
You talk about the need for education. Another thing you want to do is debt-free higher ed. And you were the first in your family to go to college. You mentioned going from the cotton fields all the way to the Pentagon. And I have to say, that's a remarkable story. And talk a little bit about how you would try to create a debt-free higher education. What are you talking about when we talk about that?
What I'm talking about, first of all, is I went to public schools, and they were well-funded public schools, so I ended up getting the resources and the education I needed from Pueblo High School, for example. When I went to the University of Arizona, tuition was $200 a semester, $200 a semester.
So you didn't have to take out big loans for that?
I didn't have to take out loans. I was able to pay for it with my summer job, or I was able to get a small region scholarship and go to college. Now, why is it that I was able to go to college debt-free, yet our younger generation is not? There is something terribly wrong. So I want to focus to make sure that we're able to, that the federal government or the state governments provide 2 years of community college for free, and they're able to do that if they get the tax revenue that they need from those corporations who are getting way too many tax breaks. And so if it's very affordable. With my experience in budgets, I know where the money is in the federal government that we can put on debt and work towards debt-free education.
There's been a lot of steps by this Congress, by the Trump administration to the Democrats would say sabotage the Affordable Care Act, and you've said you'd like to see universal health care. What do you? When you talk about that, what do you mean?
Well, first of all, I agree they did sabotage the ACA when they pretty much repealed the individual mandate. The individual mandate kept that ACA healthy, and by repealing it, they, which was repealed at the same time they did the tax fiasco, they really hurt ACA. I believe in universal health care. That means that everybody in this country has some form of health care. Right now, 40% of our population is funded by government health care, whether it be TRICARE, or Medicare, Medicaid, CHAMPUS, whatever. 40% already covered. Another big chunk is covered by private industry. And so now we have to concentrate on the 27 million that do not have health care. And we can do that by expanding Medicaid, for example. Or by expanding Medicare, having that option for them. And these are folks that need help to buy it. So I think this country can do that.
Let's talk about immigration. What do you make of this abolish ICE movement?
I see it as a structural issue. And I think that when an organization isn't working, when it is cruel, when it is performing outside of out of its mission, I think what you do with that organization is you break it apart. You break that structure apart. Then you look at the mission of that organization and you decide what it is that needs to be done. For example, we need to continue giving people the ability to to come to this country if they are fleeing gangs in other countries, and the ability to come here and ask for asylum. That needs to stay. So I really like the legislation that Representative Pecan wrote. He's from Wisconsin, and he basically said, break up ICE and figure out where these tasks, where this mission can go to organizations that know how to perform in a humane way, who are more professionals, and who can get the job done in terms of making sure we give people asylum and making sure that we're not, picking and being cruel. That is not who we are. That is not our history of immigration.
What was your reaction when you saw these family separations on the border?
It was devastating. As a mother, as a grandmother, it was devastating to even think that a child could be torn out of a mother's hand and to lose track of where that child is. It was devastating, and it was infuriating. I know government, and the fact that they lost track was intentional. There was no, if the Army can keep track of 1 million soldiers, certainly, really, Homeland Security can keep track of a few hundred children, and they just didn't care. And so that was infuriating.
Obviously, right now, we're a long way from comprehensive immigration reform in Congress. They tried to pass some pretty hard Republican bills, and they couldn't get that through the House of Representatives. But your thoughts on a path to citizenship for undocumented people now in the country?
Well, one of the main reasons, people are seeking asylum because there is a lot of danger in other countries, and I think that we have to work with other countries on a diplomatic manner to make sure that they have the resources so that they're not mistreating people, and so that we're keeping an eye on making sure that they are countries that are treating their people in a humane manner. But I also believe that people do come here to work, and we want them to. They're working in our fields, they're working in construction, they're working in our homes, they're working in our private businesses. And I think that we have a good ability to extend visas, work visas, and to, of course, ensure that they have workers' rights as well. So I would definitely look very hard at that work requirement and extending work visas so these folks are documented workers and able to go home and have also work that is safe and where they have workers' rights so they're not being abused.
But if they've been in this country for a while, a path to citizenship?
Oh, absolutely, a path to citizenship. And that path has got to be a way where they're able to continue working, continue benefiting themselves and benefiting our country. And so a path to citizenship would involve long-term work visas, for sure.
All right, well, that's all we have time for. I want to thank my guest, Mary Matiella, one of the candidates, Democrats running in Congressional District 2. And that is our show for today. My thanks to our media partners at Tucson Weekly, Inside Tucson Business, Tucson Local Media, Creative Tucson, and Community Radio KXCI 91.3 FM, where you can hear a radio version of Zona Politics at 5 p.m. on Sunday afternoons. I'm Jim Ninsel. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Zona Politics is hosted by Tucson Weekly senior writer Jim Ninsel. The program is produced by Jennifer Powers Murphy and Danny Vinnick and edited by Jim Rundle. Special thanks to KXCI, Tucson Weekly, Brink Creative Digital, and all supporters who provide crucial funding for the program. Learn more about Zona Politics at zonapolitics.com, and be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter.